현실직에서는 이것들이 지난 30년 혼자서들이 좋아하시는 거기 우리 땅을 받고 자꾸나 여기 나는 저들이 공부해야 할 대책이 없고 무대지 가지고 이것들은 현실에서 그거 죽자 부자 그러니 여기 수 야야당 모니터가 제 저기
아니 이 나는 연주야 정신을 연주야 이게 정비 거다 시다 시다 하 고미 대링기 그냥 차샤를 대링기 아니나 개왕 전부야 좀을 공기 하고 아니 오로 춘준이 샤워 공기 치고 정말 심해 아니 이내 양다 좀 있어야지 장사파를 들어보면 이때 미스 가서 누가 쇼크 주고 이러면 아니 소설이 삼제 당시 동네 시야 탐남서지 인발 사요래 아니 배는 차샤를 있는 가우 토네 이지에 이내에 양다 소설구 나타나는 로피우들이 시야 이내에 양다 소설 가서 먹을 배우지 먹을 시야들 तभी थोड़ा सा हम जो कंप्लीट किया जो भी तब हम ये चुन चुचा है वो देखिए अनी ठीक है जो तभी से मंजूर बड़े बंदर चुपने ना लगे तो तब जो रामा मेरे साथ इन्हें यहाँ कुछ तब हम जिंगे ये सभी इन्हें चाशा है तो यहाँ थोड़ा इधरे यहाँ शेर थोड़ा इधरे तो कुछ भी समझो तो थोड़ा कुछ समझ तो मंजूर काफ़ी 시야 자우지 차이래 이게 누가 somebody 완전히 텐션아 그 쉬게 소상 배나기 별이는 소라다 제가 카투지 차라요 그래서 원딩은 somebody가 미스가 슉 제가 담다래가 제가 아니 디균도양 배나기 그 쉬게 이 캐와지 보면다양 아니 춤출 때 춤추고요. 찌개야 나 그냥 이런 장 아니 오늘 보아기 다 가서 쉬기 지금 요레스 아주다 카프가 공기도 나오라 아니 디긴도 먼저다 베베 좀 돌아 쉐라야 제 다른 성도들이 소요래 아니 이 친구 멤버가 소파 주셔야 감상하고 친구 멤버요. 제가 이 카톡 차야 원기 돌아오는 제가 친구지 옆집이 아니 내린 이 총리디 개원 기부자나 제스 제들이 아니 제자들이 뭐들 너무 패배되니까 아니 내린 이 제림 통해다 문제 남아 담이만 주나 고지치야
Sehr geehrter Dr. Lammertschaft, liebe Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer, im Namen des VCT möchten wir euch ganz herzlich zur heutigen Literaturkonferenz zum Thema Waterfall of Youth und Modern Tibetan Literature begrüßen. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass so viele Leute gekommen sind und ihr Interesse zeigen für moderne tibetische Literatur. Der Verein engagiert sich neben politischer und sozialer Ebene auch in kultureller Hinsicht. Dabei ist natürlich die Kulturerhaltung ein wichtiger Eckpfeiler. Aber auch die moderne, zeitgenössische Kultur liegt uns am Herzen. Wir müssen aber auch ehrlich zugeben, dass wir anfangs selbst nicht viel wussten, außer dass dieser Autor dieses schönen Gedichts Waterfall of Youth Düngang heißt und als Gründervater der modernen tibetischen Literatur gilt und dass er vor 30 Jahren verstorben ist, bereits in einem jungen Alter aufgrund eines Suizids. Die Literatur hat die Menschheit von der Renaissance durch die Aufklärung und die industrielle Revolution bis hin zur Postmodernen begleitet. Sie hat Menschen gebildet, Gesellschaften geformt und Zeitgeschehen für die Ewigkeit dokumentiert. Die Literatur hat in der Geschichte gezeigt, dass sie als Ausdrucksform enorme Kraft haben kann. Man schreibt sich Liebesbriefe, man erzählt den Kindern Geschichten und Mythen oder man tut seinen Unmut kund. Genau weil unsere Brüder und Schwestern in Tibet keine Meinungsfreiheit haben, fanden sie ein Mittel, durch die Gedichte und Lieder ihre Gefühle und Bedürfnisse auszudrücken. Die Literatur als Medium ist ein direkter Kanal zu unseren Landsleuten. Wie schön doch dieser Gedanke, dass wir auf diese Weise direkt zu ihnen verbunden sind und sie zu uns und zur Welt sprechen können. Durch die moderne tibetische Literatur lernen wir auch die Jugend Tibets besser kennen. Eine intellektuelle, säkulare und selbstbewusste Generation. Wir lernen, was sie denken, was sie erleben und was sie fühlen. Der VTT empfindet diese Wissensübermittlung als einen wertvollen Beitrag zur Erhaltung und Neuschaffung tibetischer Kultur und zur brückenbildenden Verbindung mit unseren Landsleuten in Tibet. Wir freuen uns daher sehr auf die erste Literaturkonferenz zu Ehren des Jahres und wünschen euch viele spannende Momente beim Entdecken unserer Wurzeln und deren Blüten. Durch das Programm wird heute Migmar und Nuri führen und sie werden euch dazu gerade mehr sagen. Vielen Dank.
Wir haben im Organisationskomitee mitgewirkt. Any telling them payment non similar some testimonies in Koraming series, Koraming mother, any Narani Tamati, Chanduji, Buddhism, Tangarani, entering Zen coaching Narani. Warum haben wir uns für Zenduge entschieden? Erstens ist dieses Jahr das 30. jährt sich sein Todestag zum 30. Mal. Er hat sehr viele, sein Erbe ist sehr groß, er hat sehr viele Bücher und Schriften hinterlassen. Und alle diese Schriften haben eine Botschaft gehabt und diese ist nach wie vor heute immer noch gültig. Also 30 Jahre später ist es immer noch sehr aktuell. Any Tandati Tundruge Kola Tongdi Tsoga Yunzenzo Kachamdusena, the Tundruge Tongche, Losumju, Longosumju Kogore, any Kurangi Tanda, some Chiwatan, Kurangi Samlo, Tiget Samar Chatsama Jiyore, and they took up the Kurangi Samlo, Losumju Yungi, Samlo Kora, the Zotama. 단대 차기 지속이 내다는 상만 저아지 차고도스. Wir sind beide hier geboren in der Schweiz. Migmar gehört zur zweiten Generation und ich bereits zur dritten Generation im Exil. Das ist auch der Grund, wieso die tibetische Literatur für uns nicht so einfach zugänglich war. Es ist irgendwie sehr weit entfernt. Es gibt eine Sprachbarriere. Wir können nicht so gut Tibetisch lesen, sprechen. Migi kann sprechen, ich kann nicht sprechen, aber es ist einfach ein sehr großes Hindernis. Und wir haben auch die Literatur wahrgenommen als etwas Veraltetes, als etwas Kompliziertes, langweilig und auch immer verbunden mit Religion und auch Buddhismus, was sehr nur für Experten eigentlich zum Verständnis war. Any Marani Dawjigina, any Dela, the Dilumbanang, Ke Dilumbanang, Tar, any Quran Dawjigina, the Zenju Nangi, Mirab Niva Chagutus, any Mirab Sumba Chagutus, and Mara Dawjigina, Mirab Niva Chagur. She songs that Zenju Nang Shuya Mambuji, the Chip Papa Mambuji, Zenju Nang Ke, Yum Dibabla, Pebet Sumri, Pebet Sumri, Shinget in Zola. Tonalea, Digit Sama Lelo, Zaran and Mindus, Kaisina, Huse, the Chick Kache, the Gobble Betan Buche, and the dinner sheet, Kay, Kanye, Chegure, Puita, Puget, the Chick, Co, Ship Savage Machine, any Pebeki, Zumri, the Taran Bujo, Chache, and dealer the Chick, Delam the Lech, to Kanye Mambuji Boost.
Any moma Quran tawjina the Marani tawjina moma that Pepe Tomri Kodu Kabla ko Tomdi Ningba da any Pusutopo any dinashi Nebatu Chota Deoyo Nyopto Digital in the Chile music that in the summer of Corbiores in that Hokala that Kendru gave some low to Kabla Ja, Zormandauer, die wir da in den Chassos.
Irgendwann sind wir dann auf das berühmte Gedicht gestoßen von Tönduge. Und zwar heißt das, wie die Konferenz auch schon verrät, Waterfall of Youth. Dieses Gedicht hat uns sehr berührt, weil es wirklich ist sehr kraftvoll, eben wie ein Wasserfall. Und es hat uns vor allem gezeigt, dass wir Tibeter auch weltliche Literatur haben, die facettenreich ist und die sich mit den Realitäten und Hoffnungen der Tibeter auseinandersetzt. Aus diesen Gründen haben wir uns schließlich entschlossen, diesem revolutionären und patriotischen Schriftsteller durch diese Konferenz die Ehre zu erweisen. Und was natürlich auch noch daran danke war, dass wir den jungen Tibetern in der Schweiz oder auch in Europa das Interesse für tibetische Literatur erwecken können und auch fördern in dem Sinne.
Dene da marani chik tundru ye gi lang so ba chu peng dang bo inji thone lo du kabla halle wa chik cha shu chum chik yesos any dina shi mone chik nya di da ba chu na shi tuk shu yo wa chik so so any di nya de la mise kar do la na ko inji mi chik chue dang tha da ja me che peu mérite moins nécessaire peu mérite réel de yo na shi ton sens tene des sont tundru ye kra sartö gi samlo yune magic lense chi stina shi gega mérite gega la shengo yune magic lense monzo chi ani dige chama lense che to kabla kra la neba do jeten chi shu go dos this one the key chair tene monzo ki chongdu di koji Japanese ani chongdu di yune shenge mangbuji susu ki chongri la chik tonale ta susu chongri la chik go chik ganan ki chowa ki cheto monzo chongdu di koji Japanese.
Ja, wir erachten solche Initiativen wie heute sehr wichtig. Wir sind auch sehr froh, dass ihr so zahlreich erschienen seid. Und wir denken, dass dadurch die intellektuelle und emotionale Verbundenheit und Nähe zu Tibet und zu den Tibetern in Tibet erhalten bleibt und auch nachhaltig gefördert wird.
Any time though chongdu dige chongdu dinde kechum chagodos any channel to tamolo tering mimo with peptos any gaushera chonsons any kesi ngonzo ba dinde chongdu na shi mutune choto yina deni penal ye pinda zenjinal ye na she paru samlo da choagi jelam di pupuji dindres any days on the Mimama Gauchos.
Wir möchten wir euch noch gerne das Programm von heute vorstellen. Entschuldigung, bevor wir zum Programm kommen, möchten wir noch etwas zu diesem Booklet sagen, das wir euch vorher verteilt haben. Dieses Booklet ist gedacht als eine kurze Einführung in die tibetische Literatur. Diese Liste der Autoren und Autorinnen ist nicht abschließend, sondern das haben wir selber gewählt. Und zwar haben wir den Fokus versucht, auf politische Schriftsteller zu setzen. Und eben, also das ist eine subjektive Wahl von uns, das haben wir selber gewählt. Das heißt nicht, dass es keine anderen gibt, die nicht auch wichtige Beiträge zur modernen Literatur geleistet haben. wir haben das auch auf Englisch gemacht, obwohl heute die Konferenzsprache Tibetisch und Deutsch ist. Aber wir haben gedacht, dass dadurch der Adressatenkreis sich vergrößert und deshalb haben wir das extra auf Englisch und auf Tibetisch gemacht.
In Tandala, number Tamalola, Tepti Rayo, and Tepti Nana, Tanda, Zomba Kashiki, Zum, the Paro Javres, any Dinana, the Nana, the Todina, Zomba, and the Chasamaji Yomaran, and Dina she, Tanda, Kashiki, some series, that the Pebet Rilan. Konzo Maria some series in a Maranzo, Marani Gergi, Mixe, Chapsi, Joy, Zumla, Mixukache, Hepti Slonis, and it Marani the Dampures, or Gergi, the Gasat, Gasat Cholodores, any Hepti Pebet Hinger, Kitsum, Dire, Lavmagic Maris. The co-modernism any did have the Tanda Tungdi Nozonic in German down Puget on the chair in the Tepin number to see or the Tepin Puda Injitior, any Injiti white Yumze Pachan Mima Giloto Words.
Diese Autoren und Autorinnen, die wir ausgewählt haben, die haben wir kurz vorgestellt, vielleicht eine Seite oder so. Und der Gedanke dahinter ist eigentlich, dass ihr dadurch euer Interesse oder so, wenn ihr Interesse habt für einen Autor, dass ihr danach euch weiter informieren könnt. Es gibt inzwischen sehr viele Sachen auf dem Internet, wenn man ein bisschen sich Zeit nimmt und ein bisschen googelt, findet man sehr viele Sachen. Wir haben auch hinten extra noch eine Seite mit Biography, also mit Quellen, mit einzelnen Büchern und auch vor allem Internetlinks, wo ihr euch dann euer Wissen vertiefen könnt.
Ini tanda inchi thoda tanda Zomba Rere Mojo Tondo Jicores, Mojo di Page Sholegic Nashioris, any Shole di Mojo Chewa Jinze Karchaulana, Kesi Tonalea Chito, any Kesi Zomba Chigla Tonalea in any Susutis Tuzatanche, any Desa Chayana Tevina Lamsa, the Tom Mambuji Inji Tolan. Neres, any dinner she can take the Tamate Moto Shoglichi Kala, the Chazi Mamuji Guru, and Kisitona Yovina, and Chazi the Sina.
Also nun möchten wir euch das Programm vorstellen. Nach uns wird Dr. Lamacak die Keynote machen, also die Hauptrede und das Highlight eigentlich von unserer Konferenz. Nach seiner Rede gibt es noch einen kurzen Q&A. Das ist jetzt das zusammen mit Keynote. Nachher gibt es eine Kaffeepause unten im ersten Stock. Und zwar gibt es gibt Kaffee, Tee und Mineralwasser. Und einfach jede Person darf entweder Kaffee oder Tee auswählen. Und das wird auch, das ist so quasi in diesem Beitrag, den ihr vorher gesagt habt, ist das inklusive. Am Nachmittag gibt es nochmals eine Pause und dort werdet ihr gebeten, das selbst zu übernehmen. Nach der Kaffeepause gibt es ein Video-Interview von Hot und Jimmy. Und danach wird wird nachher noch auch eine kurze Rede vor der Mittagspause. die dann um 1 Uhr stattfindet. Und das ist dann eine, ja, wir gehen dann alle zusammen in dieses Momo-Restaurant, das ist etwa 10 Minuten von hier entfernt. Nachher am Nachmittag geht es weiter mit Workshops, also wir haben 3 verschiedene Workshops. Workshops tönt jetzt so ein bisschen nach Arbeit oder so, aber ihr müsst keine Angst haben, das ist mehr so gedacht wie Gesprächskreis. Das sind 3 verschiedene und ihr könnt dann auswählen, wo ihr teilnehmen möchtet. Genau, also es gibt 3 Workshops und an 2 kann man teilnehmen. Also man kann von diesen 3 Workshops kann man 2 auswählen. Um 3:45 ist, nein, so um 2:45 ist dann die zweite Kaffeepause, dann kommt die zweite Runde und dann am Schluss möchten wir noch gerne ein Gruppenfoto machen und nachher allenfalls, wenn ihr noch Zeit habt, gibt es hier unten auf dem Helvetiaplatz noch eine Veranstaltung für den Klimaday. Können wir nachher alle
Dini zerim chokschik dortuji model chini any thanda di zerim di model di chawa jela thanda lama kyapla ki sumshe nangre any kra sumshe nang chawa jela jiwa chime chya kubapchi yore any di jela thanda dire parse any parse munzu shela thanda di cha yana sikcha tunge yore tene eniti anda shoge gi percent di cha tungwa ina hangi number so gomusumju che yore di gomusumju di nala ta cha di nyam de yore yina ya ningo ki percent abla kuji so ge mi de ro chi Dini di percentage chuzi chukchi da kama shibchu shangala tanda orzan jingmela Quran pep to yomare tanda manzu jik sokpa chunju indu yang drosong daya da manzu kakku chadi kabla da densa chagya yudu kabla manzu Quran yomdo tanda chagya bine chanji shiwa yindi nyambar tongtong ji yore di manzu 젤 any teacher 먼저 다다 닝고 잡라 먼저 다 sabjo 라네미도 지 먼저 루가 숨 search any 루가 추주 데나라 조시 간라 지 수삼주 제레 치야나 줄레 치야지 고지 치예 엔디 먼저 기 추주 중이 다 감장하나 먼저 모조 쉬브레 엔디 제레 단다 샤자 라모 잡라 kamuchuji ya mimala ji sumshe tamshe chya kuko nangne endi na shi da chapter namu japki sonso kesi mimala chiwa yoro ina chiwa tamne ya kutos eni dije la manzo da manzo chopo ji ke saha ji yoro momo saha ji dinala ni mu khala che Any Ningu Jabde, Tanda Yingu Jabla, Joshi Sumyore, any Joshi Sumne, need the mayor. Any Dini Gum Tower Jella, and choose a chick, Ruha chick, and Yam Shuche, and choose a chick Jella, Chiwaka. Any the new Tower Jella, Zim Tower Jella, Tanda. They all telling the Kuryu down the mixed language big Dinal the Shnu Ginyam Shuchi and this one's the Tondu the Tao Jella Tanganyam do Yam Dinal Yam Shuchi and choose a Trubal and the Himalaya Sana Jokse Kashi Mayore and Dinal Hello Chin. Yeah. Any yeah. No, this Kann man da das Licht da vorne ausschalten?
Ani chiram so kanga terang dan za tembare naso jate ore inna yang mambo jinde pesha ani chiram so kanga de peji ni dang ni chena ta terang ni tamshin do de kanaji ni chige na this no this ta ni tampo ji boke 가시질라 근데 인지게 가시라 근데 보게 가시라 인지게 가시라 근데 지긴 근데 지도 강라니 상가는 기게 지 나랑 기게 지 나랑 기기 원다오리 근데 지와에는 참참라 보케는 이 말도 인지는 라베도 인지는 라베도 그래도 좀 세기지 근데 지금 지반에 그냥 좀 동다시기는 And I would like to thank Tibetan Youth Association in Europe for inviting me here. I would like to thank every one of you for being here. It's Saturday, and I'm sure you would like to have a line and, have a nice sleep. But there are a lot of you here, gathered here, and I am honored to be here and to be able to talk to you. And thank you very much. So today I'll deliver my talk in both Tibetan and English. So I'll be practically translating myself. So that means that I might miss some of the points that I'm making in Tibetan when I translate into English, or what I say in English might be maybe missed in what I say in Tibetan. If that happens, I'm really sorry about that, but that might happen. So that's my talk is going to be something like that. So as you can see, we are gathered here in honor of an exceptional Tibetan scholar and poet and a short story writer. So therefore, it really indeed is an honor and a pleasure to be here. 당아주 토만데 보간신기 모니정이 그 푸트중화그 좀바보 냥아바 셰주바 피바 데라질라 당아주 단수지야라 맞춘 좀요하리 된 좀도강라 나야데티 용탐니 사람소냠도 가차디슬랍토야 뱅아베 가오요 테페페 가송 테 모니정이 그런 소소지 포바지야노지 작송 Then somebody the numbers was happened de la Pudicini the Mimalada Kangala Monitasi del Tudici. Thank you very much for organizing this. So Tondubja is an extraordinary Tibetan artist, and his intellectual legacy is immense. As such, I won't be sort of able to do him justice in an hour. But I'll say a few things about him. I'll touch on three aspects, namely his life, his work, his legacy. That Tondubjala monitoring the Hansanga, Patishunga, Kua, Jesupa, Tendari, Korang Vegite Hansari, then I imagine meeting Chuchikula, Koranga, Dajida, Koranga, Samchuti Kula, then I did not Chuchikula, Nila Tuya, and the Mari, Pachini, Matechila, Koransin and Jitokumare. Enang terang dani kongi metseda, ini kongi samchuda, ini kongi 나좀 자지적바가 골라 이남 지금 남바 숨도 지금 가니 니 단다 다시 나긴 아니 니 담치 민라 보지 수준당 당을 정신을 밥주라 그래 The Waterfall of Tibetan Tradition and Modernity. 당이 가르치니 되나지 라베와리 단단 가출디 딱 랑추 밥추도 코랑 그다 모니장이 담추 나오니 냥 그딱 제모지 작게와 코랑베 까다치슈 냥아치 차다이와 사투 그라지니 주기 냥아치 차다이와 다 옛날에 미몽보지 근데 지 사투다 사지다 대라가 사모지 당니 영 디나모니 가르치 진몽보지 종구요 돼요 지금 같이 신경을 만들어 같이 라그메 만들어 대단히 장도 so today my talk is, as you can see, it's called Waterfall of Tibetan Tradition and Modernity. Of course, Waterfall is alluding to the pioneering poem of Dolubya, the Waterfall of Youth, which was, at the time, it was really revolutionary, and it introduced free verse to the Tibetan literature. So it was a path-blazing poem. However, we tend to focus on its sort of innovative, revolutionary aspect of it, but tend to lose and overlook the literary and artistic continuities within it. So today I'll try to say something about this waterfall of Tibetan tradition and modernity. So I'm trying to see that there's not necessarily a huge gap, huge break or rupture between modernity and tradition. There's also a continuity and flow of it. The cardinal Sujin and the Kade, Tingriblam and the Kade, Tingribram Ramjan Lam and the Tingrib Kirchintoda, Tingrib Kirsamboda, Tingrib Kirjisse, Yonti Sujin Jetta, Sujin Region that is to Yinti, Manchi, Kakaji Gorda, Dontrichada, Nukachada, Gadachada, 남준이나 내가 말 아마 좀 삼삼을 당가보다 소진이 누구나 지금 팔스 지금 동특도 어디 한도 한다 어디 맞좀 내가 랍기요 한도 내가 좀 철거도 내가 말해도 삼 아니다 담보 라바나 동두지야 공사 다 동두지야 미치가 그 좀좀 라바다 왜나 다 그런 제사 때문에 좀 북한진지 다 하고 그래 미감다 any programming dan 샤쇼니 시와레 돌만 암도니 제주메레 암도기 잔자 그런테 람나 된데 사천이 제주 제고 담아시데 다 그런 그 샤쇼라 진 샤쇼 그 나오니 단단 데니 가서데 마도 Tibetan autonomous prefecture 마도 고르르 랑총 종라메 띠는 코네요 띠는 코니 ini janzani kodan tungjude gonda tanga shesa jaga tse komyo kumara janzani tungjude tande korangam tungsaga korangam tungyu dende dadana masu google the sachaga gani tawena le konsang tungyu de so Dondubja, as you know, was born in Tibet, in eastern Tibet, what is known as Dorme or Ando in eastern Tibet. In 2 days, according to the Chinese sort of a demarcation of Tibetan territory, it is known as Malo. It is within the Malo Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. And this is under here, and it's also within the county of Chanza and Chanza Gurungtu. But like many parts of Tibet, his birthplace is surrounded by massive mountains and steep and inaccessible gorges, and the great Machu River, the river Machu, Chermachi Lama, meanders through it, nourishing its fertile fields and grasslands. So we need to sort of think about where he was born. He was born in this inaccessible, this remote part of the Tibetan world, surrounded by an incredible natural landscape. He was born at a politically unstable and uncertain time. The Chinese communists were making their presence felt in Jiangxia and northeastern Tibet for the first time with military excursions and also with the establishment of colonial outposts. Dako chongdu chelo chitong kubja ngapingasum wa. Di kamde ta ngatu di po shashula ta jabi bhachi tambo jabi marshuk sopada any jamjol maglani jabi ga magme soda tambo bolan jukki wa focus achala. Jepta chelo chitong kubja chie gu ngapchu di khawla da ku magme ti su yonggi wa. Kali sachala yong ta kawani daken kawani sichaken kalachini sacha samgen tesu tang go di kamla tonubje chungdu gu tirum dela ta jamidang nyamdu chansa da dola makchi gong go jabe makchi jamni da tenda ge pe tikku ta jura chimbu du gong la ta korang chungdu. So it's that at this time, around the early 1950s, local Tibetans took up arms against the approaching Chinese PLA and communist personnel. As early as 1950, there were frequent bloody sort of battles between the PLA and local Tibetan fighters. And before, of course, the eventual defeat of the Tibetan fighters in 1958. And these kind of accounts are given in Tibetan books as well. And don't just don't just 그런 로 총총은도 뭐 총총은도 그런 거 발라 좀샤 그런 거 발라 좀 any teaching 거니 파체 로 가시만 거라 그런 거 아마라니 양식 창사자 된다지 딱 돈도 제 그런 파체를 다충도 잘해줘 내가 그런 거 며칠 앞에 몰라 까면도 쉬우 제주 대단히 미치게 옛날 그런 거 아시안 그쇼지고 거다 다 보여 보시다 jem. So Tondubja's father passed away shortly after his birth, and Tondubja lived like an orphan after his mother remarried. As a young man, he often spoke of the hardships he had to endure as a child. Unfortunately, he had a really loving monk uncle named Tseramsona who looked after him and taught him how to read, especially liturgical texts, Doncho. And his monk uncle was imprisoned in 1958, but did survive to make a huge contribution to the survival of Tondubja. So then the Dakhonga Ashangde Kashubri, Kashupache Chitung Ganapting Habjikata, Habjilula do Pushashula, Lojigna Lape, Lo Pekachimbuchi, Telako Pachijami to Lasamosari, Tolasami Yenayam Toni Tad, Tendajinita, Tondubja, Salon Jumada, Tondubja, Donloda. So between 1960 and 1964, he attended local primary school and studied Tibetan. And these were newly founded schools, newly founded sort of Tibetan schools, and the curriculum and the standard of teaching was rudimentary. Nevertheless, it seems that he commenced his intellectual journey here. And then he attended the Maloti Getun Bhopja, which is the teacher training school in Repkun, 1964 and 69. And this was the only, the first and the only, I think, secondary school at the time then. And those people who graduated from this school mostly got jobs at the time. So this school also played a vital role in the revival of Tibetan culture in general and development of modern Tibetan literature in particular. Tatenico concern Lobchung, the Luchitung teacher David La Lobchung La Lo, any Zekun Malo Getun Hotela, that Lobjang La Pagella Peo Sare, Senajini Tedu Malo and the Getun Hotel. Doctor Dangam, the Saku Doctor Dangam Hachi, Tantango, the Rajin Sale. And now they pay Doctor Kachin, after pay Kachimbo, Natsu Puki, Tamaruk Sumrinda, Puki, Kaiti, youngster. That's the youngster that you are, this after the Shabji showed in a debut. So when he was about to graduate this secondary school, he was recruited as a translator by radio station. In 1973, after working for the provisional radio station for 4 years. He went to university in Beijing. So this was during the Cultural Revolution, and like most of the students at the time, he did not receive a decent university education. In 1976, he returned to the provincial radio station as a translator. And after working there for another 3 years, he attended Beijing University as an MA student in 1979. That 그런 거 독자들이 노동을 데려지다 왔는 그런 당보에는 제품 그 가서 마루지 개통 독자들 한 마친 거나 그런 건데 그쯤 공천이 그 노사오지샤. 애니 양 베이징 거 갑자기 뭐다 페샤. 애니 양 철페니 양 다다 솔로는 뭐 그쯤 공천이 그 노사오지니 그다지 charlie 강라 감스 망보지 남도 디카블라다 이 사지치 뭐가 kalare. 소소대소 시다 소소대소라 지 사실대소 시다 요아 말해. 그래서 사지치 뭐가 kalare. 소소 약보지 문이다 그런 거 또 요아 말해. 그때 옛날 제도 주동 급제된 동거라 아니 그 양체 베이징의 페니 베이징의 심지구마 시샤. So he went back to Beijing in 1979, as I said, attended as an MA student under the supervision of the great Tibetan scholar Dongkar Lobsang Tenli. So Dongkar Lobsang Tenli and he completed his MA thesis in 1989 and wrote an incredible Tibetan thesis entitled Puchim Gurle Shungpitang Chechu Diurto Maripi Chia number 3 So Dondrubjia wrote an MA thesis on the nature and the characteristic and history of Tibetan Gurle, the Tibetan poem songs, as it's known as. This is his MA thesis, and it's printed now in book form, and it's an incredible thesis. Even now, it's regarded maybe one of the best, maybe the most authoritative work on Tibetan Guru tradition. And this is an MA thesis, and as far as I can tell, it could be a PhD thesis. So as you can see, there is breathtaking intellectual capacity. And it shows sort of this, especially this book, shows sort of it's breathtaking in its depth of knowledge, analytical acumen, and sheer novelty. And then in the 1970s and 80s, Dondrubjia was churning out prodigious amount of work. He was producing path-blazing analytical essays, interpretative work, and imaginative work. However, in terms of his career and marriage, he was having a challenging time at the time. So that any Dondrubjia dunju, dunjuwa the gila, jachuwa gula, and it's k런 거 배 잠주대소 망보지 돈샤 잠주고 너니라 가지고 배 종종다 주스 잠주 망보 대비와래 대 지보 말에 로지가 골라 잠주요와래 아니 심주진이 시아순다 된다 망보 도요와래 대초 강가 싹도 그런 식으로 아니 심주 지주고 너니 심주라 가서 딩 사보요 심주 지당 가까이 내가 그 망보진이가 그때 잠주들 그런 거 레벨화돼 있잖아. 옛날에 그런 거 material 때다가 그 강원도 중국에서 그런 거 자리가 거리는 그들이 아니 그런 거 창사 거리는 그 material 거라 그런 거다 강남통지가 용교사 되니까. So he was, as I said, having a sort of, in terms of career and marriage, he was having a challenging time. And also because of his anti-authoritarian spirit, open patriotism, and outspokenness, he didn't get on well with the establishment, both by the government or establishment in universities or in schools. And also he drank heavily and behaved aggressively at times. And he has a really volatile relationship with his wives. He married twice, and he had a sort of volatile relationship with his wives and was physically violent with them sometimes. So he was a wife beater. And these are things that we must sort of notice, we must sort of mention. He's, at the cutting edge of the Tibetan literary invention. and he was also very attentive to the plight and the fate of Tibetan women. But at the same time, he himself had a violent relationship with his wives. And yeah, so he didn't. And so he didn't. He was the last job he held was at Solo. But he didn't really see eye to eye with the senior teachers, and his efforts to find employment at different academic institutions failed, and he expressed a feeling of despondency, and he really didn't have anyone to sort of talk to, and he was having a really hard time. So 그런 다 자리나 그런 데들이 매체가 골라 가드만 보이죠. 아니 자리다 다 접대치모다 도안에 여기 리카 에라탄이 라디오사마다 망보지 되다 같은 거라 강에도 망보지 돼 테레진우 옛날 아니 다 지도 직동급자 제장나라 제장나가 다 주축이 치 sabject 달고 시다 도알라니 그런 다 그샤샤 그런 거 샤니 다단다 도소그 도와르니 그샤파레라 도와. So Tolubja passed away due to carbon dioxide poisoning on 28, maybe 29 November 1985 in his bedroom at the Solo Teacher Training College. So the tragic manner and the untimeliness of his death sent a shockwave throughout Tibetan intellectual world. And that shockwave is still vibrating as we gather here to reflect upon his legacy. 근데 돈업자가 발치를 그런 거 총총을 누르고 네 단단히 뉴시지크 놈이네 봐요. documentary film made on Dolubja's life by the Qinghai television. They say it's in 2005 in the documentary, but it seems it's much later than that. But however, this was made to coincide with the 20th anniversary of his death. Any Tolubja that Tandani Labanade, that Tolubja, Samchu de Soga, Samchu, Rikan, that Mambuji, Sumrik, Lurji, any Jistungur, any Tosogur, any Boogie, Lurjida, Boogie, Younger, Meloma, Luteto, Tomato, Chetanga, Tissue, and Dish, Dela, that they have some Mambuji. 도요아래 다이나 대롱데 소강가라베 그 수요마 단이 지금 뺀다고 같이 지금 뺀소도 같이 지라고. As is evident in his 6-volume collected works, Dolubja's literary and scholarly output is immense. His corpus displays a huge diversity of themes beyond, of course, my humble intellectual capacity to explore. He writes on the Tibetan imperial history, on Indian mythology and Indian poetry, and Indian draped Kavya poetry, on Gur poem songs I've mentioned already, Tibetan biographical literature, and interpretative commentary, textual sort of school, university, educational texts he produced. So most of all, he's noted for producing Tibetan short stories and new poetry. His imaginative writings are rightly seen as innovative when they came out. He's still regarded as a radical and a revolutionary writer who broke away from Tibet's traditional forms of literature. There was no doubt that he was a path-blazing writer who came to capture Tibetan contemporary situation with such a novelty and audacity. He was almost single-handedly responsible for popularizing the literary form of free verse and short story. 당상계 보기 좀 봐보고 딜라 딸기 진행 그 미나 소지 공상 작다요 말에. However, there are other defining features alongside his innovative vigor, strong patriotism, and audacity to speak out against injustice. These are his deep immersion in traditional Tibetan culture, both literary and oral, and his conscious critical engagement with the Tibetan's literary tradition and oral poetry, and his ability to innovate while not totally rejecting the past. Tako neda sarto da saji ga rangin sarto ka rangin koran ga samchula yopa yina yin koran gi chachu yona mena ji khar ran ringi poki sojing ga rishong nangla tingla zatu ya da tangla zuyo ani poki rishong da poki zumik loji da poki ngaktuk zumik da kharena tesu da nyamdo ta te pechu tang tap yo Dela mulinji to dela dangju ye buji to yo. That they call the cheju hangsang ai ji example na. So when faced with the chaotic aftermath of Chinese invasion and cultural revolution inside Tibet, he was not daunted into submission by a seemingly barren cultural landscape. So beneath the sand and dust and burnt out and trampled sort of vegetation, he detected the undying vigor and the resilience of Tibetan culture. So rini saji chenpo ku jila, rini saji chenpo da ma tsuk terusitong ku ngapche ku kawa yung dali da jami pola lep, kacha jamu jini lamna pola lepare, kacha muni kama da pola zanduji, teda ji, ini rini saji chenpo lep, rini saji chenpo yung, teda ji tu konga da nga su ku da poka rishong te nyakchang ku kabla lepare, muni changi mepa chacho. Me sondawa ina ngoni me shetu jigu di kabla lepji tenda chire. Tenda chi tu da rini saji jila korang ta tenda ga nitang chi ka oni ta korang ga tsumri da korang ga kaza tsumri da korang ga shapa da ka so kare tang ba da nitang tenda chi ka ola lepdu yenang korang ga pa shimmandu 그 칼진이 그런 그 칼은 동근도 나가 파치 맞추 포기 리숑 다 셔도 지구도 다 심해져 짜손다나 딱 말은 난또 짝 내가 지도다 옛날 짜가 오라지 나와야나 단다야 다 짜사봐 단다야 짜대다 사도 대 그런 거다 내가 유주대 되나 동도 다더니 그때 동도. So he noted that a multiplicity of also, so he saw this he detected this undying vigor and resilience of Tibetan culture, so underneath all those ruins and the rubble of destruction. But he noted also a multiplicity of rivers converged into a powerful waterfall to reinvigorate Tibetan culture for a brave new world. Any kukare dongbu ta poka sacha de pena ta 다른 사지 제보다 다 잡수다 제속거리 땅 망보지거다 현주 역전 대다지를 해보도 다 옛날에 숙대 땅 후던 게 와다 숙대 땅을 락매바 숙대 땅을 락매바 그런 거 통리 마스 포크 사자 가사까지다 정보 망보지다 냠도 대다지 눈이 제진적 보는니 애니 가래 다 바추 한 지ten 사파다 제속 사파다 바추 항상하지 저기 왔다 그런 거 대다지 As for many great artists, Tondubja's creative genius lies in his ability to spin Tibet's tradition and modernity into a single nine-eyed chord, I think, gudel, that of a Tibetan sling. So, Tondubja muni jangi sartu lamna dikata Tondubja namshuk chachu yuna mena chi khalare lamna 그런 게 보기 수진다 보기 땅을 그런신 땅을 그 니땅 대수 니자 땅문이 그들 넣어진다 맞죠 그들 도와 나나의 코드 요한 맞죠 그들 sometimes it's called what Johnson code or something like that, you know, it's spanned into that kind of chord. So he's spinning both the past and the present, both the tradition and modernity into one. So let me demonstrate this point through a few samples of his work. So what T.S. Eliot called a historical sense, or the consciousness of the past, in his famous essay Tradition and Individual Talent, also informs contemporary Tibetan poetry and also informs Donubja. This is what we're talking about, a deep engagement with the past literary luminaries. So without engagement with our literary tradition, without engagement with our past poets and great figures, an invention of a new literary form, an invention of new literature, or something that is breathtaking and path-blazing is difficult. So similar thing seems to happen in case of Donubja. And you can see that Donubja also, he was credited with the sort of being the father of modern Tibetan literature. But in his seminal work that I mentioned, in his MA thesis, he contends that innovation entails a tremendous collective labor on the part of generations of writers and artists. As well as a process of critical evaluation. In his view, no individual author could achieve such a grand task alone, no matter how distinguished he or she might be. So Donubja here is mentioning, as you can see, I'm not going to read it now, without an engagement with the past, without acknowledging great luminary figures from the past, cannot move forward, cannot invent. And this is his idea. And this idea formed his work, his imaginative work as well. One only needs to read his most pioneering free verse poem, Waterfall of Youth, which introduced the genre of free verse as a defining feature of modern Tibetan poetry. To see his engagement with the Tibetan literary tradition. Its form deviates from the strict sort of Kavic metrical composition, but its imagery does not escape Kavya. Tandi samno de tawa na chu khongchang ge langchu bachu gu somna ta langchu bachu do dam ramu nyang ta pugi ramu nyang po ke sombe de ramu nyang ta ti ji khen ta nyang so re di ngela ji nyang ta ten da juju da ten da nang ni ramu nyang ka lu de hashi ji lu du sam sam yena ga ko na ji de da ji rang so so pe chu tang ni chap ki ji ga ta 다 돈을 제래 돈을 제사 또 받잖아요. 단디 좀그 루티 다른 모양은 나고도 한 모양은 그냥 같이 가마. 그러니까 그냥 그 직통다 다지 쓰다 대소 대소 돌로도 참다요. 지금 준주들이 참고하다. 준주들 정통다 강가 쇼로가다 강가지 냥보인 거다 직통 방법이 되다 요만 양 그 지한다 되다 좀 요주다. 되다 매워서 చెప్పాలి. 되다 릴하우로 미수에나 뒤툭주고 냥아 뒤쿠다 냥 그 루지 딱 그런 거 나서라 못 주지 와 옛날 냥을 내가 따와 있나요? 네 나로야 나좀 메로마 냥아 그 누트 나좀 동거했다 메로마 냥아 그 누트 네 나로니 탈이오마 as I said, it does not escape the influence of Kavya poet. Kavya is this poetics, this poetry that Tibetan literary tradition inherited from India. In fact, he only wrote 5 really verse poems. The majority of these poems are written in classical style, be it at times informed by Guru genre or traditional Tibetan oral literature. Even some of the images and phrases he uses to invoke the visual and the oral sense of splendid beauty and the sweet melody of the waterfall are covered. Yang meloma luteta, meloma janda, luda, sigda, tujo so dinola, levion, tapena kalawari, munjota, teso rigte, korang, achi sakulinju, nyanga kanala, teso lendu. Tapena compound expressions like peacock feather tips, parrot plumage, patterned brocade, and the bow of Indra are employed to induce visual beauty of the sparkling and the spraying waterfalls. Tangatsude, Wangbu Juri, Lavendo, Tangbi, Yang Nga, Lavendo, Ni Dizzy Yang, Lavendo. This will Ganga, Melomag, Trijindi, Melomag, Tujut, Melomag, Lukanon, Yungu, Janchavi. These are recurring motifs and kernings of classical Tibetan literature employed to convey visual and oral beauty. Admittedly, these images refer to the beauty of a new and promising generation, but they nonetheless remain stereotypical representations. Yenayang deso chontang tsujote meomaga tsujote so yonggewa yenang chontang chonshade kakar. It represents something different. But as noted earlier, this notion of Karlapare, these features of Tibetan Tondugya, most innovative poems, I'm underlining this, not questioning his innovative, of course, his innovative spirit or his innovative vigor, but to point out his debt to Tibetan's literary tradition. As noted earlier, this notion of Tibetan youth or the youth of Tibet, but the other thing is that here we're talking about, again, something called Tibetan youth. Also we call the youth of Tibet, the youth of Tibetan history, youth. But the notion of the Tibetan youth and the youth of Tibet that breathes vitality into Tibet is constituted of Tibet's past and present. So the notion of Tibetan youth in here is also made of Tibet's past and the contemporary present. It is a waterfall formed of the long history, territory and culture and the contemporary changes of Tibet. Book Sachada, book Regionda, Puki, Tangruk, Jirwada, Chitsuk, Pinjet, Mango Chikata, Tandagi, Lamsu Bachundu, Tedaji Jundu. So these constituent parts are represented by the countless types of water and rivers that characterize the natural beauty and richness that feed the great waterfall. Dan desu kare chu ringmangbo, chuna ringmangbo, sangbo ringmangbo jikada ngasu di danda langsu bakche di tukun. Langsu desu chonta the symbol representative, the symbol changchang desu kanga. Image, representative image changchang. Nyanga ka zhenyen. Nyanga ka hyen changchang. Nyan desu kare chonggodu, chonggodu kare chonggodu ngasu buki region, buki logic, buki sacha. Tenda Mangojida Nitin Tungudusa, Tapena Dechita, Dela, Tande, Langtu Bachi the Galari Tabus, Langtu Bachi that shoot the Bacho Hunganga, Shuchemo, Nishuchemo, Marpalo, Tabachu the Kare Tabu, Kare the Bachu in the Chapari, and the Dela, Shesum Kaniwa be Chachi, they have some Sunny do be Chim, don't some Satan say with Yamchin, against some Kankan Kavi Yamchin, Zayan, Kamchin, Zachin, Yachin, Nachin. Nachin, Rechin, Longchin, Pechin, Dachin. Okay? So it's giving this idea of this different waters, these different rivers, kinds of things that contributes, that feeds the Tibetan waterfall, the waterfall of youth. Yes. What he's saying, yes. Why you are so powerful? Why you are so splendid? Why you are so fearless? Because rainwater that falls from the sky in the 3 spring months, fountains that gush out of the earth in the 3 summer months, the essence of frost and hell in the 3 autumn months, and the quintessence of snow and snows in the 3 winter months, and more, snow mountain rivers, rock mountain rivers, slate mountain rivers, forest rivers, marshland rivers, mountain top rivers, valley rivers, rivers from the upper and lower parts of the valley. Okay, rivers, different types of rivers. Why different types of rivers? Different types of Tibetan cultural contribution. different types of Tibetan history, Tibetan land, all these things, all these waters. He's describing Tibetan landscape, Tibetan natural environment, and these are where Tibetan rivers comes from. Tibetan rivers originate from landscapes like this, but also they're representing something. What are they representing? They're representing the diversity, the diverse richness of Tibetan culture, and that is what contributes to Lamtsu Bachi. 다카르라군요. 노르나 자히위치, gelumjumichi, tun드비치, 야르 자든지치, 편성축비치. 다다 국가 국의 리중기는 거다 소진의 리중기 망고진 거. 제 최에나 야르 자든지치를 아니 점점 막지 자동제 천나 막지 정한 거. 천는 편대지 제식임비 양서 집 적림 바쁘고 천는 용도지 제식임비 나쁜 거 양림 좀. In short, rivers that generate auspiciousness, rivers that issue forth virtue and fortune, rivers endowed with the 8 qualities, rivers sublime with all perfections. 108 different rivulets, tens and hundreds of thousands of different converging rivers. Because you are a river of solidarity, you dare to follow steep cliffs. Because you are a river formed of all rivers, you dare to leap off terrifying gorges. So these kind of ideas, for instance, rivers that generate auspiciousness, are Tibetan traditional ideas informing this river. For instance, we say Yalab Jadanjiche. It's 8 different sort of qualities, 8 different qualities that in the water, which we say Ngarwa Chuena, Yalab Jadanjichula, Ngarwa, Solwa, Jamba, Yengwa, Tangwa. Any kind of Jambala Magnupa, any Poala Pamba. Actually, these are different qualities that Tibetan traditional sort of positive healing qualities that Tibetans attribute to water. So he's inheriting this kind of ideas. And it is because of all this that this waterfall is great. This waterfall is powerful. And what is this waterfall? This waterfall is Tibetan youth. But also, what is this waterfall? This waterfall is the Tibetan nation. So it's not necessarily just, he's talking about just youth. Okay? But we are talking about a waterfall in contemporary Tibet. So we need to face the modern plight, the contemporary condition of Tibet. But when we face it, when we embrace it, let's embrace our past. Let's embrace our tradition, because it gives us sense of identity, it gives us strength. And he seems to be saying something like that here. So these different rivers and various types of water, as I said, it's like Tibetan history, territory, culture, Tibetan situation, current situation, are the factors that furnish a waterfall with a fearless, brave heart, is to quote the poem again, with a fearless, brave heart, indomitable pride, imperishable majesty, and inexhaustible power. The poem's torrential flow gathers momentum once the poet realizes that Tibet's past is indispensable in facing its present and forging its future. 다코데 나식데 체레도 카레 체레도 요네 부기 디스마다 부기 리중다 부기 로지가 부기 사자다 망고지가 다 티추 춘전 망고데다 다 바추는 디용 바추는 디용데다 바추도 체레도 체레도 다 바추셔그 요네 냥아 코름 셴도 요네 바추셔그 요네 다 나추 부게 다 롬발라나 부게서 미리라나 부기 머리도 예겨 윤도 추노 정도는 윤이다 냠겨 그 대용도 상관없네. As noted by many, his Waterfall is undoubtedly an expression of burning desire for freedom and modernism and innovation, as well as resolve to face the challenges of a new age. It is also his ideal of change based on preserving and reinforcing the strengths of the past, whilst also embracing the opportunities of the present. This synthetic approach can be detected underneath the rhetoric progress and relentless forward march of the poem. The poem lists the 10 traditional Tibetan sciences, or fields of knowledge, and asks what should be done to advance them. And the Waterfall's answer is to embrace modern scientific and technological progress and ideas of change. We should therefore not be surprised to hear more than a rumbling echo of classical Tibetan culture or literature in the works of an author who sought to refine Tibetan literary production through preservation as well as reform. 아니 그냥 그런 거 정신 그 그러다가 이 라고 소진다 땅을 니가 내가 지지 잡다요 원래 아니 이게 그냥 내가 주지 땅을 없다 싹도다 다 그런 가서 니 땅을 가지고 갈라고 가야 니 땅에 갈래지니 니 땅에 뭐야 지금 봐 띠꾸래 얘는 잔다지 가는데 땅 가지고 그런 게 그냥 말라라비와 다 리니주 가지고 리니 지와가 총화가 우리 이제도 정리 대 예지 땅에라 가르치게 봐. 그다음에 대소 유라비오마. 맞죠? 우리 지오때 섬때 예지 가르치 땅에 아 예지 잘한다. 낙선다. 저쪽 로고아래. 남들다 가르고 다 띵르다 주주 땅에라 주주 땅공도 주주 땅근 땅근이 야래 망보진도 그다음에 다 파제되는 거죠. 맞죠? 비 가서 괜히 준비게 냐가 같이 때가 지진 나 괜히 준비 그 냐가들 그 땅을 좀 라방도 그 부기 동을 좀 같이 괜히 준비해 부기 땅을 좀 그라 좀 바고 시작해요. 니상 동안 뛰는 거나 괜히 준비게야 딱 살바다 땅을 근처다 아니 땅을 근처에 니린 지고 니린 지나 뒤에 판다 뭐 니자 요주 때 니린 지고 너 때다지 람도 단대수 쌍놈으로 찍바 연구도 되나? So I think I'm running out of time now. 두수 그 다음에 럼수 받치 놓으시네. 너야 두수? Yeah. any 다 잔다지 그런 그 쌈종 골라지라고. For his short story, I'll just say a few things on his short story. 아니 쌈종님이 그런 거 쌈종라 나와야 다 쌈종들 망보 때나 사치 좀 메토도 좀 당자오 대충 그 쌈종라 따야 말이나 디나노님 그런 거 가지고 부기 소진 거 좀리다 영 부기 나톡 그 소진 거 좀리 망보지 렌즈 술 망보지 렌터바다 렌즈 때 가지고 다 촌톡 거 다 지금 가지고 네 그 패치 this is one of the first I think his short stories called Drompa. So Dorje does not only rely upon Tibet's literary high culture for his innovations, but also borrows equally heavily from Tibetan oral traditions. He procures sustenance for his short stories from different types of oral poetry, such as ballads and the Gesed epic, and exquisite proverbs and formulaic expressions and figures of speech. So if I just cite this, sort of the magical and vernacular diction and the lyricism of the Tibetan Gesed epic is apparent in this poem, in this short story. The Dongba, Donglam, Gesed the Donglam can be Rinisaji Chembo Kabla. 아니 종을 맞춰봐다 시당 맞춰봐다 된다고 시치페니 아니 그 종을 맞춰봐라나 가요 이제 종을 잡기나 종람이 아니 그런 거 잡수지 된다지 그런 종바다 종바데 종바데다 같이 세다 맞추다 So this is a short story on a Tibetan bard, an epic storyteller, the teller of a Tibetan epic, Gesser epic, set during the Cultural Revolution. I think it's one of the, maybe the first in Tibetan language, the first short story that talks about Cultural Revolution. It's a critical about Cultural Revolution. Very brave at the time. This is just maybe 4 years after Cultural Revolution. Where the bard, Tibetan bard, was, at the time, there's a policy of Cultural Revolution that where the traditional songs and traditional epic performances were banned. So they were not allowed to tell stories or legends or episodes of the Gesser epic. But the storyteller, the bard, refuses to obey these instructions and goes on telling the story, and then he gets tortured and struggle session, and literally he loses his life. So he was sort of tortured to death. And that's the story. But however, at the end of the story, the short story, we hear the Gesser epic. Gesser epic comes out. And Dongdubjia praises the Gesser epic and the bard. So by frequently heaping praise on the Gesser epic, and Dongdubjia makes it clear that he sees it as a life-giving force in terms of Tibetan national revival. At one point, the eloquent narrator says that by the effective means of Gesser epic, the bard had given courage and purpose to Tibetan youth throughout his life. He had revitalized elder generations and given happiness and hope to people during times of despondency. As the story comes to an end, the narrator mourns the bard in the following words of aspiration. Ah, bard, the gang of four have tortured you and made your precious body perish. Yet the vitality of your Gesser epic blooms like spring flowers in the minds of the Tibetan people. So 다 종 연바 그래서 다 종바가 거기 지금이 종바가 거로 종지 종바가 종지 니니 내 부기 미리다 부역 거기 Tibetan nation 다 셔도죠 리니 사지 쳔보가 갑라 메토 진다 양치 yardım 양치 맞죠 센터 진이 양치 yardım 양치 yardım 때다 종근강이 그래서 그 종대 때 일단 손땅 손신도 지금 손신도 어디 참니 딱 그뒤 갈라고 니티나 때나지 라군도 삼 아니 젠다 that the art of storytelling here comes to sort of, symbolize the Tibetan spirit and their struggle for cultural survival. So through the tale of traditional oral storyteller, I guess a bard, a modern storyteller not only summons the Tibetan epic narrative to the mind of the reader, but also captures the experience and trauma of a distraught Tibetan generation. 다 그 동랍기 그 칼랍군도 네 멍보지 계속 그 동대 멍보 고요. 이런 거 계속 랍치고요. 막 계속 그 동 랍치고요. 막 다그 랍용도 공라 계속 동 랍에도 요주대 땡아솔라 하고주 롱칸다. 애니 때 랍기 부기 로지가 강라 동이 친구지. 나도 친구지 종주. 드니사지 친구가 갑라 딱 눈이 정리 로지가 나마 마종지 종주. 띠 냠용 로지가 냠용데 굴랍게. 다단다디 Walter Benjamin, the critical theory, 항상 상로와 된다. 그 칼라도 남는 자 종랍던 거나 종랍이야게 제스터, 다 종셰피 제스터, 당시 다 종동셰파게 제스터 거나 그 칼라도 남는 팔측 냠용게 지오지라야 누시. 미가 냠용 지오지라야 누시. 초박의 냠용 지오야 누시. 때다 종근은 올라 땡도 나쁘노. ini Isaac Garrison de kata simbo de tingka moram khar la kundu dungul la beti ta dungul la beti te dongchi la pa na ti ko la dongchi la pa na pe na dungul te dong la ji ro na na dungul ka ko la dongchi la pa na ani ti dungul te ti ngoya chi da dungul te ti nasu te ti sant ya gum to ya li la ondo de la son yo Tante khare mitina di khare labkundu di takar di don't jaga khare sorry let me switch back into English now. So as Walter Benjamin noted, the art of storytelling is the ability to exchange experience. So here in Don't Just Guess epic, the epic storyteller, the experience is both individual and collective, because a storyteller constantly integrates others' experience. So in Gesser epic, in epic bard, Donubja uses the tragic tale of an individual to encapsulate traumatic collective experience during one of the darkest times in Tibetan history. So the short story remembers the cultural trauma by remembering a traditional mode of epic narrative, as it weaves the epic into its own fabric. This remembrance and reappropriation serve as both political criticism and reinforcement of Tibetan collective consciousness, which, as suggested already, are inherent within the elements of the Tibetan epic itself. That is I'm being chased by time. So I'll skip some of the points of this short story and talk about his legacy. I told you just legacy. So his enduring legacy. So they are, of course, I've just mentioned his contribution, his innovative contribution to Tibetan fiction, Tibetan short story, and Tibetan poetry, especially free verse, which you know already. But now there are many books and journals and poetry and even PhD theses published in his name. And conferences are held in his name, like our conference today. And poets and scholars and students are influenced by him. So even today, I think till this day, almost every year, his death is commemorated in Tibet at a collective gathering, at some gathering somewhere, every year. So first gathering took place, another point is also his work comes in school textbooks, in both high school and university textbooks. So this is a secondary school textbook, where you can see some of his short stories, his poems, including Langtu Bachi, are included in school textbooks. And as you can see, one of the first, the first ever anniversary conference on Dolobja's anniversary of Dolobja's death was held in 1986 and in Lanju University. So they found it very hard at the time to convene this conference, but they went ahead anyway, against strong instructions from the government and from the university establishment not to convene the conference. They held it. So the one on the on your left here, on my right, is Waterfall Youth Conference on Tibetan Poetry, which was first held in 2003. So this is a biannually held conference on Tibetan poetry. And that's a piece on the 20th anniversary of Dolobja's death. They're having a conference there in Ceylon. So So on and so forth. There are lots of gatherings, including our own here. And just lastly, I think I'll just mention that the Tondobya Zaji, and the Chomboji, Zamchuda, this Tumbaboda, Shimjikpada, Mombojila, Pachak Teware, Shanshu Teware, any Shimjuk Tevda, any Kalapore, Bumrambada, Shimjuk Homada, Chechunda, Mambo, Tondobya Kola Tiju, Teda Chumboji, any Tonda Toyada. 제가 mambo gangi todo jagi shanshik te danga chun chonta kudu ni de soba boranya kini denda kala pore chontamda kono pakchak te so takma chumba mambo da debiyo dande kharijini denda yungiyo kharijini jimsun kharila rabiyo keso ma chusammo tamba yena takam tis la paena kache ta tinta yende da kono moni joniga namshu honsanga 요즘 교활에 좀바보리 심지바래 이 주스 바래 이 그런 거 주스 그런 거 양하다 그런 거 잠종대 소리 뭐니 텐슈 주스 그 텐슈 항상 요즘 된다래 된다고 강이 그딴다 그런 거 자지 문틀 도다요 근데 니니 카레 그런 게영 맞추 부기 니탄 거 골라 뽑아치 뭐지니 라제지 그런 거 뭔지 랍툰 그런 거 뚝툰 당부 라지알람이 람큰 때문에 송이다 라지알람에 대해서 그런 라지알 특히 까짝짝이 진행 거다 맨날 좋지 애니 보기 니탄 단다 나춘다 딩드 보유크 니탄 티콜라 공성거 좀다데 소티니 좀그런 거 렌트리와리 다티 니탄한테 탑주오지 냠친치 아마도 간가 시에 데라지라 렌트 티 니탄데 줄리오마 니탄데 단단한 데다 니탄 두체 연차 그런 거 좀다 그런 거 잘 대수 단단해 제로해봐 때때가 지금 조금 뭐지 so eventually I think there are some of the factors that there are of course many factors that account for the endurance of his legacy but if I just mention a few of the prominent ones I think his creative genius that embraced Tibet's tradition of modernity and Tibet's tradition and modernity in all their complexity, is one, and his deep patriotism that fueled his writings, as his endeavor and audacity and aptitude to capture contemporary Tibetan condition under colonial rule, and the continuity of this colonial condition inside Tibet, and the unpredictable fate of the Tibetan people. Hence the ongoing relevance of his writings, and his contribution to the flourishing of the Tibetan language and literature, thereby contributing to the survival of the Tibetan language. And his role in deepening the understanding of Tibetan intellectuals concerning Tibetan history and classical literary culture, and his role in fostering Tibetan unity and national consciousness. And these are some of the reasons that his legacy is enduring.
아니 군소 엄마 안들이잖아 제주 좀 그래 니나라 그 같이 되다 들으려 걔랑 이제 튕기 있나요 걔랑이 진짜기 링고다 총레스 아니 딱이 디라테 지리다 만수 삼절라 딱 들으려기 남가리도 사제 파데 레오레 삼디 아스나티 코람 비비 공기도 만수 유럽 나기 베베 셴게 소제 다른데 지리라 좀 왔어요. 아니 다른 나시 다른기 좀링기 총리기 다른 나시 뒤에다 통도 종이 튼디 이나야 디제 다른 튼디 이나야 총리 리바디 챔버 총리 상도 아니 제장 먼저기 또 프레젠트 중이라고 체크하시는 초치라다 하유 드레스 드레스 만지는 먼저도 좀 있으면 니 니어 좀 차원에 아니 그냥들라 그냥들라 저가 변함이 의미 그냥들 의미 저가 대화디 차다 아니 티겐도다 닉세 케바 라마잡라 닌 컴퍼니 투치시 주어지
lama 되는 바로 지만이 하체려오네.
아니 다른기 제린 고지층에 정마저마다 민생한 거라 냠들라
Wir möchten auch noch ganz herzlich Jungjob verdanken.
Jungjob ist hier?
Ah, ja, doch. Er hat auch heute den Workshop geleitet mit Günther zusammen und er hat uns auch sehr unterstützt bei den Vorbereitungen der Konferenz. Und er hat auch maßgeblich dazu beigetragen, dass dieses Booklet auch auf Tibetisch erschienen ist. Und, ja.
아니 단다 융격라 믹스에 투시 슌데도스 가이스나 코란기 먼저 총비디 traditional 할레오 로바야 혼나서 anything 시 단다 탭디 페이지 뷰 나오는데 코란기 지가 먼저 남데 망고체어 레디나시 코란 디톨 차례 망고 나오레스 any 다른 디나시 지 삼종 거치 인상권에 투시
바라나시 다른기 성분에 나오라 냠셰제 쟁에 창말라 수치치 수치와체 아니 마음바다 연결 다리나시 성분 연구 주투와 대화기 다 무엇이나 당분간은 마치들 나와라 점에라고 지요레지 다니 기타 공기어 말이 가스나 다리 때 뭐와치야 주를 파레스나 등상 페리스나 남기 자체기 성지 주투기를 거기